that you heard, which was yesterday's, is one of the tunes on the album. There are a number of tunes on our album that feature two rhythms from Cameroon, West Africa. One rhythm is called the Mangambe, and the other is called the Bakutsi. So you'll be hearing kind of like different variations of those two rhythms, and you know, the things that we do are deeply spiritual. Both of these rhythms are ancient, and they were used in times of celebration there in Cameroon. I worked with Richard Bona. How many people know Richard, are familiar with Richard Bona? If you don't, you might want to, YouTube him, Google him. He's an amazing musician, an amazing bass player. But anyway, I worked with him for a couple of years, and he taught me these various rhythms. And when I was in his band, I actually couldn't play them. So I would have to go home to the village, and my woodshed and play and practice, and then come back on the gig to play those rhythms. So the next song that we're going to play is a tune that I wrote dedicated to Richard. It's called Pinda. His actual name is Richard Bona Pinda Uma Ilolo. So I just called it Pinda.